for the benefit of those who can't be here in person. So the meeting is now being recorded. La session est maintenant enregistrée, mais vos web caméras et vos micros sont désactivés de façon automatique, donc vous resterez anonyme. So the meeting's being recorded, but your videos and your mics are automatically deactivated, so no one will see or hear you. I'm going to share my screen now so we can get started on the presentation. So thank you, everyone, for joining virtually. I'm Angela Savanen, the Assistant Dean of Admissions and Recruitment at the Faculty of Law. Merci à tout le monde d'être avec nous aujourd'hui en format virtuel. I'm joined this evening by my colleague Kelly Hanley, Senior Admissions Coordinator, et aussi par un de nos ambassadeurs étudiants, Xavier Lévesque, qui a vécu l'expérience de repostulant avec succès et qui partagerait sa perspective avec vous ce soir. So before beginning, I'd like to acknowledge that McGill University's downtown campus is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, one of the founding nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Archaeological records and oral history tell us that Tiohtià:ke, the place we know today as Montreal, has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many Indigenous peoples. As the descendant of settlers to this place, I recognize the role played by my family's history in perpetuating the structural harms caused by colonialism. As a member of the admissions office at the Faculty of Law, I am also in many ways a gatekeeper, and I will continue to commit to the ongoing work necessary to move the legal profession, this institution, and the Canadian landscape towards true and authentic reconciliation. Donc, comme vous le savez déjà probablement, le programme de droit à McGill est fièrement bilingue. Alors, la présentation se fera en anglais et en français ce soir. The presentation will be given in both English and French, and you can ask your questions in either language. A little bit about me before starting. So I'm a McGill alumna. I did a BA at the School of Environment before completing a master's in geography at Concordia, after which I came back to McGill to complete my law degree, so a BCL LLB at the time. I then practiced law for nearly 4 years at Canadian National Railway, mainly in the areas of Aboriginal and environmental law, before returning to my alma mater in my current role. And I graduated from the law program in 2014. So while much has changed since that time, I have a good sense of what life at McGill Law is like. So feel free to ask me questions about that. And I see Kelly has raised a hand. Kelly.
Someone is saying they cannot hear anything you're saying.
Okay. Can you hear me, Kelly?
Yes, I hear you
Okay.
perfectly.
Perfect. I'm not sure if others are having the same issue. I'm not sure. And maybe Kelly, if folks can't hear me, maybe Kelly, if you just want to ask to make sure if people can hear, if they can say, they can say as much in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm getting confirmation from others that they can, so I'm not sure. I'm really sorry for the person who's experiencing this issue. Maybe try logging out, logging back in. In any event, the session will be recorded, and I'm hoping the recording is picking up my voice, so hopefully you'll be able to hear at a later date. Thank you, Kelly, for that.
You're welcome.
Donc, l'ordre du jour aujourd'hui. Donc, la première partie, les volets 1 et 2, va comprendre le contexte de notre processus. La deuxième partie, partie 3 et 4, va comprendre le passé, donc analyser le refus que vous avez reçu et mieux comprendre votre demande. La troisième partie, les parties 5, 6 et 7 sur la diapo, c'est vraiment pour se préparer pour l'avenir. So looking forward, how to improve your application a second time. All of these points, so points 1 to 6 should take about an hour. And then we're going to hear from our student ambassador, Xavier. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A period. So what won't be covered in this session is general admissions information and the application process. So you'll need to listen to the general admissions information session, which was recorded last week and is actually available now on our website. On the recruitment page. Veuillez s'il vous plaît ne pas poser vos questions via la fonction Q&A ou clavardage. Vous pouvez les poser à n'importe quel moment durant la séance ce soir, mais nous ne répondrons pas en détail, pas avant la fin de la session, pendant la période de questions. C'est possible que ma collègue Kelly partagerait des liens avec vous pendant la session, mais nous allons passer au travers toutes vos questions en plus de détails vers la fin de la séance. So please feel free to ask questions at any time. However, we're not going to be answering them directly or in much detail until the end of the session. So, post them in the chat or the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. So the reality of admission to McGill Law, and I'm suspecting that many of you may relate to the person who's shown here on the slide. So this person maybe looks confused, sad, disappointed at your refusal, maybe even angry. I'm going to talk about this again a little bit later, but I just want to start by saying that an important cornerstone of the legal profession is civility. So at all times, we strongly encourage and appreciate your politeness in dealing with our office, even when you may be upset. Please know that it's hard for us to refuse you, and we really don't take our decisions lightly. La réalité est qu'il n'y a simplement pas assez de place pour plus que 180 élèves dans notre salle de tribunal-école, qui est la salle la plus grande à la faculté. Donc, il y a vraiment un nombre limité de places disponibles à la faculté. La grande majorité des dossiers sont refusés parce que, malheureusement, nous n'avons pas assez de place. Il y a beaucoup d'excellents dossiers qui sont refusés. Vous n'êtes pas seul, but there are many excellent success stories from reapplicants, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But I wanted to just give a little bit of context to the sad reality of the fact that the vast majority of applicants to the faculty do get refused. So we end up having to refuse over 1,100 applicants every year. There's approximately an 8-to-1 ratio of class size or applications to class size. I put together this slide just to show the increase in the applications to the faculty that we've had over the last 5 cycles. So last year, the 2021 cycle was a bit of an anomaly. We really saw a huge increase. But there is an increase over time in the number of applications we're receiving. And these numbers represent the number of completed applications. So these are not total applications. These are really the applications of folks who have completed all the documents, because there are upwards of 100 files annually that get canceled because they don't submit all the documents. So this is really completed applications. Obviously, as we have more and more applications and we're limited by space, there's an increase in the number of files that get refused every year. So this is the percentage of files every year that get refused. So there's a slight upward trend, but you can see that it's somewhere around 80% of files, 81%. It's really important to note here that very few files are not competitive at all. And many of the files that we see are from very smart, very hardworking students who are really doing everything well. I wanted to show this slide to show you the total number of reapplicants that we have annually, and there has been an increase. I think we saw many last year because many people were refused the year before because we had so many more applications, but we do see an increasing number of reapplicants over the last 5 years. Il y a plusieurs types de repostulants. Donc, on a des gens qui ont été refusés directement après le cégep. On a des gens qui ont été refusés dans la catégorie université. On a des gens qui ont été refusés après avoir eu une place sur la liste d'attente. On a plusieurs gens qui sont refusés parce que leur bac ne serait pas terminé. Il y a beaucoup de refus tels quels. So reapplicant can mean a lot of things. Like I said, someone who's reapplying 3 years after being refused from CEGEP, reapplying after one year at university, someone who's reapplying with a graduate level degree, someone who's come very close in the wait list. So, you know, there is some differentiation in the pool of reapplicants. I wanted to show here the percentage of the total offers that are made to reapplicants in a given year. So there is sort of an upward trend, but on average, around 10% of all of the offers that are made in a given cycle are made to reapplicants. So the chances of being admitted once you're a reapplicant, they're not, zero, but they're also not as high as if you're accepted the first time. And I wanted to show this to give you a sense of what your chances are of being admitted as a reapplicant based on how many reapplications or what number you're at. So the percentage of all reapplicants who are admitted after their second application is around an average of 14%. So 14% of people who apply a second time are admitted, which is not high when you think about it in relative terms. But it is higher than folks who are applying again after that. So really only about 2% of people who apply a third time are admitted, and the chances go down even more after that. I mean, the average is 0% of folks who are applying a fourth time are admitted. So I just wanted to give you a sense of your chances of being admitted as a reapplicant, and they do diminish with subsequent applications. So this is obviously not to discourage you or dissuade you. It's more of just a suggestion to do some soul searching. Law school applications are very time consuming and they are expensive. So if you continue to apply and you continue to be refused, it may be time to reevaluate your strategy. If you're being accepted to other law schools, but not McGill, and if you are truly committed to studying law, I encourage you to accept another offer. We are very lucky in Canada to have a whole network of amazing law faculties. And I know some people get hung up with reputation and this and that, but I guarantee that if you are coming out of any of the amazing law faculties in Canada with a law degree, you're going to have a very successful career as a legal practitioner in whatever capacity you might want to be working. And if you're getting accepted by other schools, then I encourage you to really, really think hard about whether or not you want to go there. Some people get really, dead set on coming to McGill specifically, and sometimes it's not going to work out. And I would say that if you are not receiving offers anywhere at any law school and you've applied a couple of different times and you continue to get the same answer, it may be time to rethink whether law school is really for you. So again, this is not about trying to discourage you from reapplying. It's just that sometimes we need to take a moment to think and do some soul searching, look deep inside of us and say, is this really what I should be doing? I'm a firm believer that the universe sends us messages. So I'm a little woo-woo in that way. So the second part of the presentation is really about sort of understanding what your refusal letter was saying. So understanding the why of the refusal, analyzing it, and really being attentive to and critical of your own path. I'm trying to be transparent here. And so some of you might feel, when you hear what I have to say, you might think it's difficult to take, but I'm sharing so you know more. It's better to have more information than not enough. And it's really important for you to know how decisions are made so that you know what you're up against in terms of admission to McGill Law. It's really meant to be a positive workshop. So this is really the part of where the workshop takes meaning. So we'll work through together, but you need to be attentive to and critical of your own path to really benefit from it. Okay, so you've heard a lot about how McGill Law, or hopefully you've heard a lot about how McGill Law has a holistic approach to evaluating our applications, where every element is taken into consideration with, context given for academic performance as well. But like I said, there's really an imbalance between the number of spots and the number of people who apply. So the sheer competitiveness of the pool dictates a very long, some of you might know from maybe receiving your decisions quite late. So, it's a very long, difficult, and comparative exercise between candidacies. This ultimately leads to us having to refuse many files with positive elements. And ultimately, you were refused because there were stronger files ahead of you for the number of spots we have. And the makeup of the pool does change from year to year. But I would say that the one sort of commonality between students that we admit to the Faculty of Law is that element of academic excellence. So we have a faculty committee-based review process. So, you know, the holistic process is that we're going to look at all of the different elements of a student's application. It means that we don't have particular academic thresholds that we're looking for, or cutoffs, but, you know, that we're really taking each file and we're doing a deep dive and we're trying to understand who this person is, what may have led them to coming to law school, what may have contributed to their either success or maybe some challenges with their academic trajectory so far. And we're really just trying to see, we're trying to build a class in, you know, that represents the Canadian landscape, that, you know, represents the kinds of individuals that we want to have at the faculty, different perspectives, different backgrounds. And so it really does take time for us to go through every single file. So someone may be considered for admission, although he or she may have been refused on one ground alone without the holistic process. So, for example, if, you know, they you know, didn't have very strong references, for example, but other elements of their file made up for that. This gives the admissions committee really the freedom to sort of, you know, make sure that we're making the most informed decisions about who we admit to the faculty, and possibly give a chance to a file from someone who has very interesting features with strong potential to contribute, but may have some, you know, some folks might think weaknesses as well. So the rest of the file can really pull up that one element that's maybe a little bit weaker, including grades. But I would have to say again that grades are really never completely sort of terrible throughout. So there may be 1 or 2 semesters that haven't gone well, where there's a clear explanation why. And so the holistic approach really does not mean that we favor candidacies who have lower academic performances over stronger ones. It may seem obvious, but it's worth noting that it's still very competitive grade-wise. And sometimes people are under the impression that because McGill considers more than grades, they have a higher chance of being admitted at McGill because of other strengths than other law schools. This is true to some extent, but also not true. We really do want to be sure that every student that's admitted to the faculty has shown sustained evidence of academic excellence and the ability to really, you know, not necessarily get A's at the Faculty of Law, but really just make it through the rigors of the day-to-day reality that is law school, which is that it's very hard. And a lot of students struggle. It's a big transition. So McGill makes a great effort also to put quantitatively less stellar grades in their proper context for candidates who may have faced barriers to higher education. So having come from a low-income family myself, where neither of my parents went to university, I recognize that many of our applicants are supporting themselves, both financially and in terms of their education. And so sometimes that leaves less space for, you know, being very involved and you know, having, you know, great volunteer experiences or something of the like. So we really do try and take those things into consideration. So the elements reviewed during the holistic process, again, are the academic records and the LSAT, if it's taken, the CV, the personal statement, the reference letters, and the extenuating circumstances document, if one is submitted, any supporting documents, and of course, evidence of linguistic abilities. C'est très important que toutes les personnes candidates ont les niveaux de anglais et français qui sont nécessaires pour succès à la faculté. So again, we don't weight any one element of the file any more so than the others. We don't have cutoffs, I mentioned that. But you know, the holistic approach can allow us to overlook maybe 1 or 2 elements that are weaker, but rarely will we see a file that's admitted that has maybe more than 2 elements that are somewhat on the weaker side. We have a first screening, a first triage on linguistic abilities specifically. And so a file that does not have the requisite level of English or French, and I would say more French than English, it is refused. And it doesn't matter what your GPA is or what your LSAT score is. If you're not coming into the faculty with the level of French that's required at the time of admission, which is a B2 level in French, you will be refused. You know, a lot of people say, oh, well, I'm going to take French courses, I'm going to improve if I get admitted. That's not enough for us. We want to know that you're going to come into the faculty from day one. And even before that, you're going to be able to communicate with the faculty before you even start your classes and be totally comfortable passively bilingual in both French and English. So when you're refused, it can mean very rarely that you were not competitive across the board, or more often, although you had a number of strong elements, there were more candidacies who were stronger overall for the number of spots available. So we don't give personalized feedback to any refused candidates. And I know that some folks might be frustrated by this and wish that they had a little bit more information. But out of fairness to all, we have so many folks that that are refused, unfortunately, that we just can't, we can't just take the time to speak to everyone individually. We would be only doing that all year. So your letter does give you a little bit of information. It's very nuanced, but I wanted to go through some of what you might see in your letters. So the first, what we call a postscript, the first sort of wording that would go into your letter is that you had positive elements, but you were overall not competitive. This is the most commonly used postscript or reason for refusal. It means that there's a mix of weaknesses and possibly strengths, but not one element in particular was weak. There were several non-competitive elements taken together. You may have come close on several, but overall, you just didn't stand out in the pool. So think back to your file, assess your weaknesses and strengths. Through this workshop, we're going to keep feeding you information to paint you that picture. So, for example, if you have strong grades from your perspective and when looking at the stats, then the issues in your file are probably your CV, your personal statement, and your references. The next potential postscript you might see in your letter is that your academic portion is not competitive. This is really used in instances where the academic profile that you have submitted is really out of the ballpark uncompetitive towards the pool, and keeping in mind that some folks have submitted extenuating circumstances. This is really in situations where the grades are just not there and there's no clear reason for that. And so unfortunately, your transcripts exist as they do forever. And unless you have a great LSAT or a new degree that you've done that shows that you do have those academic abilities, or extenuating circumstances that we don't know about, that you then disclose in a subsequent application, you are unlikely to be admitted if you reapply. So if you got this reason in your letter, really think hard about the ways in which you can improve your academic abilities. In terms of insufficient French, so this is a reason that might go into your letter when it's very obvious that you just do not have the level required. There's just no evidence anywhere in your file. So the rest of your file, as I said, it may have been great, it may have been stellar or not. And so if your French were improved, it's possible that there would be a chance of us considering admission, but it could have also been uncompetitive on other grounds. And if we see that there's good potential for you to be admitted in a subsequent cycle, we would normally say, your French was insufficient, but we would encourage you to improve that, and we would welcome a subsequent application from you. So we're going to sort of indicate that to you in your letter. But if we did not say that, then again, it's not just about the French. You need to think bigger about what other elements in your file you might want to improve. Another reason that you might see in your letter, and we do see this fairly enough because students are, or prospective students are welcomed to apply with a minimum of 60 university credits. So theoretically not necessarily on track to be completing their undergraduate degree. But given the pool and given our preference for a completed degree, it's just not competitive for you to be applying without you being sort of in that final year of your undergraduate degree. So your file might have been promising, but it also might not have been. And everyone who comes in this sort of category of students is encouraged to reapply. So, we're trying to give you another chance. We're trying to say, come in as a really truly competitive university category applicant. And so, you know, whether you have a strong average or you're unlikely to be competitive, you would not get this if you're not going to be finished your undergrad. The next sort of reason that you might find in your letter is that you were refused post-interview. This is a rarely used postscript, so I'm sort of doubting that anyone on who's joining us today will have seen this. But this is really just more of a statement of fact, and it's not really a reason per se. Your interview may have been determinative if you were asked to come for an interview, but this is not usually used for CEGEP folks who if they're being considered for admission, are all asked to come in for an interview. Rather, those folks are being encouraged to reapply after their undergrad. You know, you might infer that your interview may not have been determinative of our decision, but it's really a case-by-case basis. So again, I think this one is rarely used these days, but if you see it, it's really more just a statement of fact than us telling you that your interview was not successful. And then some of you might see this next, the last reason here, encouraged to reapply, in addition to some of the other elements that I've already spoken about. But really here, do take this as a good sign, right? This is us telling you that you had many good elements, that you were borderline, but you were not quite waitlist potential. It may also be an indication of something really obvious that needs to be fixed, like your language or an LSAT. So, you know, if you got this reason in your letter, that's a good sign. Just a note for anyone who's joining tonight who was waitlisted and refused ultimately. Waitlisted applicants' letters don't offer any reasons for ultimate refusal beyond just lack of space in the class. And so they should all consider themselves encouraged to reapply. So that's a little message for any folks who were waitlisted in the past. Okay, so the next part is about really looking at and grasping and thinking about your strengths and your weaknesses. Donc, saisir vos forces et vos faiblesses. Très important. So I wanted to just talk here a little bit about academic, the level of academic competition that you're up against as an applicant to McGill Law in general. So for our 2021 incoming cohort, and I apologize, we don't have the 2022 stats ready yet, but for last year's incoming cohort, 85 was the average for university candidates, so 85%, and 92% of the class had an average over 80%. So that's quite high. For the LSAT, the 2021 average was a 164, again, quite high. 86% of the class had an LSAT score of 160 or higher. So it gives you a sense of, you know, if you're getting a lower LSAT than that, maybe your chances of being admitted are a bit lower. And then for R score, the average incoming R score for folks admitted from CEGEP was 35.041, and 93% of our admitted CEGEP students had an R score of 33.000 or higher. So it's quite competitive. Just a quick note here for university candidates who went to CEGEP in Quebec. Don't worry too much about your CEGEP grades. Not as much weight is put on your CEGEP grades. And so, you know, the stats here that I'm showing on the slide are really for CEGEP candidates. For those who have these grades, we're really looking for we're really looking more at your university level transcripts than your CEGEP. CEGEP sometimes didn't go well for folks. I know that I really struggled in my math courses, and I'm really glad that the admissions committee didn't look at my CEGEP grades when I applied. So, aussi très important, si vous avez d'excellentes notes et vous avez tout de même a été refusé, il y a plusieurs choses sur lesquelles vous devriez travailler. Et c'est légèrement un peu plus facile car ce n'est pas fixé dans le passé comme les notes. Donc, pour le CV, est-ce qu'il y a des activités qui sont très passives où il y a plus d'activités qui démontrent votre leadership. Par exemple, avez-vous 8 clubs étudiants, mais pas de rôle de leadership sur votre CV? On dit toujours, on cherche de la qualité au lieu de la quantité sur votre CV. Donc, gardez ça à l'esprit. Par exemple, avoir 1 ou 2 activités sur votre CV dans lesquelles vous avez été très, très, très impliqué. C'est plus compétitif que plusieurs activités à niveau passif. Il y a plusieurs combinaisons dans un CV qui peuvent être gagnantes. Par exemple, le travail, le bénévolat, les sports, la musique. On veut voir vraiment une profondeur d'engagement. Sur le CV, les CV les moins compétitifs sont celles qui contiennent rien sauf les études et des emplois d'été. On veut vraiment voir que vous avez été impliqué, encore une fois, peut-être c'est sur 1 ou 2 activités seulement, mais à un niveau plus profond. En termes de la dissertation personnelle, qui était auparavant appelée, auparavant appelée la lettre de présentation personnelle. Désolée pour la coquille dans la diapo. C'est très important de la relire plusieurs fois. Demandez à une amie, à une de vos références de la lire et assurez-vous qu'elle répond à les 3 questions très importantes pour nous de voir. Donc, pourquoi le droit? Oui, c'est très important, mais aussi pourquoi le droit à McGill et pourquoi vous, comme personne candidate. C'est vraiment un exercice de réflexion et vous devriez nous convaincre pourquoi vous aimeriez faire vos études ici à la faculté au lieu de notre faculté de droit. Répondre à ces 3 questions, ça aide vraiment le comité des admissions à comprendre les facteurs qui vous incitent à poursuivre une formation juridique, les raisons qui motivent votre désir pour les études en droit et votre intérêt, l'intérêt que vous portez à notre programme spécifiquement. Donc, la dissertation permet aux membres du comité des admissions d'évaluer votre qualité d'écriture aussi, ainsi que votre capacité à vous exprimer clairement à l'écrit, que ce soit en français ou en anglais. C'est vraiment à travers ce document que nous allons évaluer votre niveau de maturité et de jugement. On passe des entrevues pour seulement, d'habitude, c'est seulement peut-être un nombre plus limité de personnes candidates matures, mais la majorité des personnes à qui on fait des offres, on ne leur rencontre pas pendant les entrevues. Donc, c'est très important de prendre beaucoup de temps pour écrire la dissertation personnelle la meilleure possible. Pour les recommandations, les références, assurez-vous qu'elles soient pratiquement toujours très positives. Ne choisissez pas quelqu'un qui va nous donner une référence qui est lukewarm. Et si c'est négatif, ça pose un grave problème pour nous. Par exemple, si on voit dans votre lettre de recommandation que vous avez des problèmes avec des dates limites, des problèmes au niveau communication, ça, c'est problématique pour nous. Puis, même si vos lettres de référence sont positives, elles peuvent être moins compétitives si elles semblent coupées-collées, non spécifiques, ou elles parlent uniquement de vos qualités personnelles. Comme par exemple que vous êtes très respectueuse, que vous avez posé quelques questions pertinentes pendant la session, que vous êtes impliqué à l'extérieur de l'école. Ce sont des commentaires positifs, mais plutôt hors sujet pour nous. On cherche vraiment des commentaires sur la qualité de vos interventions, la qualité de votre recherche, de votre rédaction, sur votre intelligence, votre curiosité académique. Et si la lettre de référence ne mentionne pas ces choses, ça peut être positif, oui, mais pas nécessairement concurrentiel, parce que ce n'est pas vraiment distinctif pour nous. En termes des aptitudes linguistiques, c'est pas nécessairement concurrentiel dans le même sens que les aptitudes académiques. Donc, ça veut dire qu'être complètement bilingue au niveau compréhension et expression n'est pas plus compétitif que d'avoir des aptitudes linguistiques de base pour l'éligibilité au programme. On veut vraiment s'assurer qu'il y a le niveau qu'on a besoin. Puis, au-delà de ça, la distinction se fait sur autres facteurs dans votre demande. En termes de circonstances atténuantes, ceci entre en ligne de compte dans l'évaluation du dossier scolaire et éventuellement du CV aussi. Les circonstances atténuantes peuvent avoir un moindre impact si elles ne sont pas supportées par des preuves externes, le cas échéant, mais elles sont toujours prises en considération par le comité. Et le comité donne beaucoup le bénéfice du doute au niveau des circonstances atténuantes. Donc, s'il y avait quelque chose qui s'est passé, mais vous n'avez pas parlé dans votre demande, ça peut répondre aux questions si vous les expliquez dans le document supplémentaire des circonstances atténuantes. So, as a whole, with regard to the other elements of your file, again, if you're competitive academically, then really think hard about, these things that I've just mentioned. But ask yourself always, are there elements that may lead to questions being asked by the committee? Have you anticipated what those questions are? Are the gaps filled in? As I said, we do not interview the vast majority of people to whom we make an offer, right? And we don't, it's really a small number of mature applicants and then any stage up applicant who's being considered for admission. We don't know you personally, and most applicants are not interviewed. So you really need to use your application to tell us everything about yourself that you can. And those gaps might not necessarily be obvious to you. So again, I recommend if you can, ask someone you trust to take a look, see if it all makes sense to make sure that we're gonna get the most out of your application as well. Okay, so to talk now a little bit about some of the pitfalls that plague most reapplicants. So first of all, those who reapply without changing anything at all, you're very, very likely to be refused again, unless you were on the wait list until the very end. And even then, reapplying is not just waiting for your luck to turn or waiting for the pool to become less competitive. And I just have to tell you that it won't, especially if I do my job well and I try and continue to encourage the best and the brightest to apply to McGill Law. So really, you have to change something in your application. Another pitfall is that you improve on your strengths instead of addressing your weaknesses. Again, you're very likely to be refused. Again, your weaknesses really do need to be addressed. The committee won't get past those major weaknesses. And of course, the natural tendency for us is to do what we're good at, but you need to work on the weaknesses, even if it's painful to do so. So you really can't wait for the pool to become less competitive. You have to face those weaknesses head on. On voit aussi plusieurs fois que les aptitudes linguistiques n'ont pas été changées. Je comprends bien, c'est pas facile de changer les aptitudes linguistiques. It's very hard to learn another language. So, unless you've really gone above and beyond and you've taken those courses and you've really made an effort to get, most of the time, again, it's folks who are needing to improve on their French. If you're not coming in with the level that we're looking for, and you're saying just like I'm committed to doing this, that's not going to be enough for us. Un autre piège qu'on voit très souvent, c'est que la dissertation personnelle ne fait que parler du refus et du chemin le chemin parcouru depuis votre refus et ne répond pas aux 3 questions qu'on pose. Donc, pourquoi le droit McGill et pourquoi vous? On voit, on garde à l'esprit aussi le fait que très souvent, au travers un dossier d'un repostulant, on voit la nature humaine. Il y a différentes approches face au refus. On voit des gens qui sont très déterminés, qui font les changements et tout, mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont très têtus ou qui sont bornés. Ils ne veulent pas faire des changements nécessaires. Par exemple, on voit des fois que la personne a vraiment pris ou a fait des efforts pour postuler à d'autres facultés de droit qui démontrent pour nous le sérieux de la démarche de vouloir étudier le droit au lieu de quelqu'un qui continue à repostuler chez nous seulement sans vraiment changer les choses. Donc, c'est important de garder ça à l'esprit parce que le comité le voit. C'est très évident pour nous. Un autre piège que j'ai mentionné un peu au début, le concept du civility. On voit très souvent que les gens qui sont refusés brûlent leur pont à la faculté. Et nous essayons très, très fort de ne pas admettre de personnes candidates qui seraient toxiques à la communauté de professeurs et d'étudiants. Nous comprenons très bien la nature des étudiants en droit, ou du moins le stéréotype de l'avocat. C'est quelqu'un qui aime argumenter et qui aime combattre ce qu'il perçoit comme une injustice. Cependant, un bon juriste le fait avec respect, intégrité et intelligence. So I spoke at the beginning again about the importance of civility as a future jurist. So if someone acts in a way that is, uncivil, impolite, rude, either during the admissions process or after a refusal, this could harm their chances at a subsequent application. We understand that you may be upset, that you may be frustrated, but one of the cornerstones of the legal profession, and it's actually something that our Dean Leckie said in the first speech he gave to the incoming class this year. He went through the articles of the Code de déontologie des avocats that all lawyers in Quebec are required to follow, and the importance of civility is really, really paramount. So if we see this kind of behavior, it's going to raise doubts about this person's judgment, their maturity, their leadership, and their ability to work with others, all of which are elements that we look for in our candidates as stated in our admissions policy. So please avoid this pitfall if you can. So useful tips for building a more competitive application. Obviously, avoid the common pitfalls. This may seem obvious, but just keep them in mind. Be open to change, be adaptable, really go back and look over your file, do some soul searching, try and think about the ways in which you can improve. One of the biggest is, whether or not you can redress your lack of academic competitiveness. So can you write the LSAT? Can you rewrite it? If you're writing it for the first time, this is good in some ways because it's going to be a new element that you can add to your application. And this is especially important if your academic performance is below our admitted average. So it just gives us another piece of information about your abilities from an academic point of view. You can also consider, and I say this, and some folks might say, well, I don't have the money or the time for that, but some people, what they do is they end up going on to do graduate studies, especially if it's something that they're really interested in. We see this a lot, right? Someone's refused directly out of an undergrad, and so they go on to do graduate studies. They end up doing really well. They do really, really interesting things. They gain life experience, and then they submit a subsequent application, and they're successful the second time. As a comparative baseline, we do use undergraduate performance, and we use that to compare you to other applicants. But how you perform in your graduate studies is also very relevant to us. And obviously it's going to give you the academic element, but also, as I said, the life experience and others. For folks who have applied out of CEGEP and who were refused, and our student ambassador, Xavier, will speak a little bit more about this. A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll reapply after they've completed their undergraduate degree, and they'll find more success. Because again, it's about that life experience. A lot of us maybe tend to figure out what we want to do in university. We tend to find a subject that we really love, and we end up doing really well. And the pool at the university level is slightly less competitive than at CEGEP. So you have a little, slightly higher chances of being admitted. If your grades were strong enough to be admitted to a law school in Canada, but you were refused from McGill, Another option, if you want to consider it, is to apply to McGill as a transfer student. So at least you'll get going, you know, in your goal to completing law studies. And also, if you do very well in law school, those grades will be given a lot of weight because obviously they're highly relevant to predicting your academic success here. But I would say that if you are thinking about doing this and applying in the transfer student category, really make sure that the reasons why you're coming to McGill and want to switch out of another law school are very, very clear. And I cannot stress this last point enough, especially this year. Check our instructions for application every year. You cannot presume things don't change. And this year, much has changed. If anyone has started their application yet, you'll see we have an entirely new application system, different way of getting reference letters from your referees, different requirements with regard to you submitting your documents and reusing documents. We also have a new optional applicant category for Indigenous applicants. So make sure you take the time, read our website, attend our sessions, meet with our advisors so that you're not making a silly mistake as a reapplicant. Okay, so in terms of what goes into a new application, really everything has to be new. You need a new personal statement for sure. This personal statement has to stand alone. You can't assume that we're going to be looking at your old one. So the word limit is 750 words. It says new limit on the slide, but this has been the limit for the last couple of years. So unless you haven't applied in a recent cycle, this is not new for you. But really, you need to take the time to work on that new personal statement. If we look back and we see your old one and it's pretty much the same, that's going to tell us that you maybe haven't spent enough time thinking about your application. You need a new CV. So again, maximum 2 pages. We have specific requirements on our website about this document, but it should be new. For your transcripts on your references, in past cycles, we said you could sort of recycle these. And in some ways, you can reuse them, but you have to submit new copies via the applicant portal. In the past, we were using Minerva and you would collect your reference letters directly from your referees. This is no longer the case. So really everything has to happen through the applicant portal now. And so you do need to re-upload any of your transcripts, whether they're final or official or not. And you need to input who your referees are going to be into the applicant portal because they're going to be prompted automatically by the system to submit their forms for you. So you can certainly choose the same people as you had in the past, but they do need to resubmit everything through the applicant portal. And the new application ultimately has to stand on its own merits. So the assistant dean is going to have access to the old file, but I say don't presume that I'm going to read it in its entirety. Really, your new application really has to be an entirely new thing. In terms of having access to your old file, we do have we do keep your files for a period of 3 years in our archives. So I'm going to look back and I'm going to see what you did in the past because we have a new system. I'm not going to be able to input all of that information into our new system. I'm going to be relying on our old system to view all your documents, but I will look at them because I really want to see how your file has evolved since your previous application. So, you know, there are a lot of reapplicants, so this is not something that is foreign or new to us. If it's older than 3 years, everything gets shredded as per university's retention schedules. So again, that's why one of the reasons why we need new everything. So I think that about covers what I wanted to talk about in terms of the new application. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn things over to our student ambassador, Xavier Lévesque, qui est un élève de première année de notre cohorte de première année cette année. Quelqu'un qui a été refusé directement du cégep, mais qui a repostulé après avoir terminé son bac. Puis c'était un grand succès. Donc, il est avec nous maintenant à la faculté. Donc, c'est ça. Je vais céder maintenant la parole à Xavier. Donc, Xavier, si vous voulez prendre quelques minutes pour en discuter de votre expérience, ça serait super.
Oui, merci. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien? Oui, parfait. Donc, c'est ça, comme la doyenne adjointe Sylvanine l'a précisé, j'ai été refusé du cégep à la faculté. Puis après, j'ai décidé de, c'est ça, faire un baccalauréat en histoire. Et j'ai réappliqué ensuite. Yeah, first of all, well, congrats for being here. It takes a lot of courage to come here. Like, I remember last year, I was at this exact same place, like taking notes and like really trying to put all the chances on my side. And like today, when Assistant Dean Savanin was showing the numbers, I remembered that I was stressed too when like I looked at such numbers last year. But believe in yourself, to be honest. Like you can do it. If I did it, you certainly can be a successful reapplicant story. Personnellement, moi, c'est sûr que je voulais étudier le droit. Puis McGill, c'était mon premier choix, étant donné que je suis de Montréal. Mais j'avais aussi appliqué à d'autres facultés comme Montréal et Sherbrooke, juste parce que je voulais étudier le droit. Donc, appliquer à d'autres facultés, ça abaissait personnellement mon stress euh, si je rentrais pas à McGill ou ailleurs. Uh, I would say my best like advice would be have a plan on your application. Uh, what was like the issue the first time? Understand what was going on and like try to address it. And like personally, I had like 3 years to like address the problem. I knew my grades coming out of CJET was well below the like average R score of admitted CJET students. So like I knew that I during my undergrad I needed to like aim very high for good grades. And yeah, so like in a way, be sure that like your second or third application, be sure it's better than the first one. Uh, for the pour la lettre de présentation, non, la dissertation personnelle maintenant, euh, c'est ça. Moi, c'est vraiment là que j'ai mis le plus d'énergie. Et soyez certain de répondre comme aux trois questions, why law, euh, ce qui est à mon sens peut-être la question euh, où vous allez pouvoir trouver un point d'intérêt personnel quand même facile parce que je veux dire, le droit, ça touche à tout, peu importe tes intérêts, il va pouvoir avoir un lien. Puis après, là où j'ai mis un peu plus d'emphase, c'était pourquoi le droit précisément à McGill, puis pourquoi moi. Euh, so, I would recommend to write your letter in like the language in which you are most comfortable. Étant francophone, moi je l'ai écrit en français. Il y a une limite de mots, puis c'est vraiment important de la respecter. Puis je veux dire, je sais que si j'avais écrit en anglais, ça aurait été moins fluide aussi. J'aurais peut-être utilisé plus de mots pour dire quelque chose que j'aurais été capable de dire plus succinctement en français. Donc, if you're an Anglophone, I would recommend, or if you're more at ease in English, I would recommend writing it in English. Même chose pour si vous êtes francophone ou plus à l'aise avec le français. Euh, Encore pour la lettre, là, je pense, je vais surtout insister là-dessus. Là. Play your best cards. Like, la réponse, like, why you, is like, selon moi, it's like, how do you stand out from other applicants? Like, because as Assistant Dean Savannah told us, told you, like the application, the committee of admission is doing like a comparison of your application to the rest of the pool. So like everyone has something special to offer. You certainly have great experiences. Be sure that like your best experiences are known by the committee. So je dirais vraiment ça, comme jouer vraiment vos meilleures cartes, comme essayer. Puis moi, j'ai été quand même précis dans ma lettre. J'ai pinpoint comme deux domaines du droit qui m'intéressaient. Par exemple, moi, j'ai vraiment toujours intéressé par la politique, par l'histoire constitutionnelle du Canada. Alors, j'ai regardé aussi, comme sur le site de la faculté, qui travaille là-dessus. Il y a des profs, tu sais, qui travaillent sur tellement de sujets différents. Puis, je suis tombé sur la professeure de droit constitutionnel, Joanne Poirier. Euh, j'ai, j'ai lu un article d'elle, j'ai parlé d'elle dans ma lettre, j'ai parlé de ça. Euh, Puis, ça montrait que, selon moi, je voulais vraiment aller à McGill en raison de mes intérêts à moi. Donc, j'avais été capable de comme un peu combiner des réponses à deux différentes questions en parlant de cet intérêt-là, personnellement. Ah oui, puis une chose qui est vraiment importante, ben, que moi j'ai trouvé très importante, c'est de vous-même réviser votre lettre tout le temps, tout le temps, tout le temps, comme laissez-la comme mijoter, fermenter, genre 2, 3 jours, revenez dessus après, genre, premièrement, vous allez peut-être identifier des erreurs, admettons, des fautes. Puis la forme, c'est important. Genre, j'insisterai aussi là-dessus. Assurez-vous que votre application soit bien soignée. This is one of the first thing, like, I think the dean told us, at the faculty. It's like, a good form won't make it up for, like, a bad content, but if you have a good form, in addition of a good content, well, it's gonna help your case for sure. Puis, faites aussi réviser votre lettre par vos amis qui écrivent bien, puis vos profs aussi, ou si c'est des profs, parce que pour les lettres de recommandation, moi, c'était deux enseignants. What do you mean by good form? Euh, like structure. Ouais, peut-être je vais revenir à ça après. Euh, je l'ai fait réviser par mes profs aussi. Euh, je veux dire, vos profs, peu importe vous étudiez en quoi, ils en ont écrit des lettres là, de demande de bourse pour appliquer à la maîtrise, pour appliquer au doctorat, tout ça. Fait qu'ils sont habitués à avoir des lettres comme ça aussi d'étudiants, fait qu'ils peuvent vous aider puis vous dire, ben, ta structure, elle peut être meilleure. Pour le CV, personnellement, I followed the form proposed on the side of the faculty, mais vous pouvez vraiment l'adapter à votre candidature. Comme I didn't have any like academic publications, so like I took that off and I like put a couple more extracurriculars. Once again, as in the letter, I really made sure to like put my best experiences like in evidence. Euh, c'est pas mal ça. Peut-être, j'avais vu qu'il y avait des questions, what I mean by form, mais comme moi, personnellement, c'est un truc que j'ai fait. Genre, j'ai adressé ma lettre à Madame Sivanen, genre, puis j'avais juste une bonne forme. J'ai inclus ma signature, le nombre de mots. En fait, quand je parle de la lettre, en fait, c'est peut-être plus en général votre application, au-delà de la lettre, là, de votre CV, puis genre, assurez-vous de respecter les consignes. En fait, c'est vraiment juste ça. Moi, je suis vraiment un nitpicky, là, genre, j'aime vraiment comme ça la méthodologie, puis je suis un peu nerd à ce niveau-là, mais assurez-vous de comme si la limite de mots, c'est 750 mots, genre, ayez pas un mot de plus. Puis, d'ailleurs, aussi, un truc, moi, j'avais pas 750 mots, j'avais un peu moins, j'avais comme peut-être 680, 650, puis euh, je pense que vaut mieux, si vous êtes capable d'être clair en un certain nombre de mots, go ahead. Like, don't feel yourself obliged to fill with like useless words, I'd say. Euh, Puis c'est pas mal ça. Ah oui, peut-être deux petits conseils comme plus généraux en tant qu'appliquant, comme euh, la première chose, c'est do not look into like forums online. Uh, I know like I didn't look into them when I was applying, but when I did, when like the application process was over, like I was like looking into that. And to be honest, it just made me stress way more than if I had not looked into that. Euh, genre, regardez pas ça, genre, les personnes qui écrivent là, c'est genre des gens comme moi, des gens comme des étudiants, puis c'est pas eux qui prennent les décisions, fait que c'est pas comme, il y a pas d'information vraiment pertinente qui va être là selon moi. Puis, dernier truc que j'aurais à dire, juste, like, do your best at your application, like, give it your best shot. This is really what I tried to do when I applied for law school. It is tough to apply. It is very stressful to, like, just find, like, teachers or people who want to write the letter of recommendation, like, have a good uh, personal statement, and, like, see if your CV is up, like, polish it up. And once it's done, like it's done. Like I know it might be easy, like for me, like got in to say that, but mon ami qui m'avait beaucoup aidé, qui est maintenant en quatrième année, tu sais, il me disait ça aussi, genre, do your best, and après, c'est pas entre tes mains. Il y a une expression en français que j'aime beaucoup, c'est fais ce que doit et advienne que pourra. Donc, je pense que c'est ça. Écoutez, moi, si je l'ai fait, je suis sûr que vous êtes capable de le faire aussi. C'est pas, c'est pas, c'est loin d'être impossible. Puis, c'est compétitif, c'est sûr, mais il y a des gens qui rentrent, puis il y a des, puis vous pouvez très bien aspirer à ça. Merci.
Génial, merci beaucoup Xavier, c'était très utile. Vous avez mentionné plusieurs excellents conseils. Juste une très petite question pour vous. Avez-vous révisé la lettre que vous avez soumise avec votre première demande quand vous étiez en train de préparer la deuxième, juste pour comme revoir puis peut-être identifier plusieurs choses à changer, juste par curiosité?
Vraiment une bonne question, parce que je pense que ma lettre, après quand j'ai appliqué du cégep, I don't think it was very good, and uh, I and I knew like that was not a good reference for me. I'd say I did look into like two of my good friends who did got in from CJEP and are in 4L. And like, je pense que, en fait, les raisons pourquoi je voulais étudier le droit après le cégep et les raisons pour lesquelles je voulais étudier le droit après comme 2 ans et demi, admettons, ou deux années pleines d'université, étaient vraiment différentes pour moi. Comme je trouve qu'il y a quand même beaucoup ben, personnellement, genre de chemin entre 19 ans puis 22 ans. Comme en fait, c'est moins l'âge que l'expérience universitaire. Ça m'a fait questionner, tu sais, est-ce que je veux continuer, admettons, à aller à la maîtrise en histoire, continuer à faire ça ou aller en droit. Fait que, mais mes raisons étaient très différentes. Donc, moi, personnellement, j'ai pas regardé vraiment, non, ma lettre. Mais j'avais un petit stress que, genre, peut-être que le comité des admissions regarderait ma lettre du cégep. Puis j'étais comme, ah non, ça va pas être bon. Mais je pense que ben, c'est plus vous qui pouvez répondre à cette question-là que moi. Mais je veux dire, ma deuxième, j'étais vraiment plus confiant avec ma seconde lettre, étant donné que je l'avais plus révisée. Puis je pense que j'étais correct avec ça.
OK, merci, très intéressant. Puis c'est vrai qu'on voit très souvent avec les personnes candidates qui postulent directement après le cégep que les raisons changent tellement entre une demande après le cégep et une demande après un bac. Puis it's often in those applications that we see the most evolution in reapplicants. So I appreciate you sharing that perspective. A couple of things that I just wanted to sort of follow up on that Xavier mentioned. Very good advice. Ne vous fiez pas aux informations que vous allez trouver dans les forums. Please do not, take to heart the information that you're seeing in the law school forums. There's a lot of information on there that either isn't true or is totally inaccurate. So if you have questions, if you want information, please reach out to my office. We would be very happy to give you the real information. I see all kinds of crazy stuff on there, all kinds of urban legends that are based in not in fact. So please don't stress over what you're reading on there. Sometimes people will post. I remember 2 years ago, someone all of a sudden was posting that at the end of November, our offers were already going out. And I went, I'm not sure who's making those offers because it's not me. So please do not rely on the forums. Un autre point que Xavier a mentionné, c'est to play your best cards in your personal statement. Et très, très, très souvent, on voit des raisons très génériques dans les dissertations personnelles. Comme par exemple, je vais étudier le droit à McGill parce que c'est bilingue, parce qu'il y a un programme de BCLJD. That's true of everyone that applies to McGill Law. Those are the reasons why folks want to come. Mais on veut voir vraiment une connexion, puis les démarches que Xavier a prises en termes de faire des recherches sur les professeurs à McGill, lire leurs articles, prendre connaissance de ce qu'on fait ici, c'est excellent parce qu'on veut voir une connexion explicite entre votre dissertation Et les autres éléments de votre demande. So for Xavier, for him, it made sense, right? He's interested in politics. He had indicated some activities in sort of the political sphere in his CV, and then he talked about it in his personal statement. So he connected the dots really well. And I say it very often in a lot of my presentations. We want to see a thread that ties the file together rather than having these different pieces that are sort of sitting by themselves. Those are the files, those are the personal statements that really stand out the most. And I think the personal statements from reapplicants that stand out the most for me are the ones where it's really obvious that the person has done their homework and has really tried to tighten things up in that sense. So again, tying the different elements of the file together and really telling us who you are. I think that was what I wanted to follow up on in terms of Xavier's comments. Donc, merci beaucoup Xavier. Si vous avez d'autres questions pour Xavier, veuillez les poser dans la fonction clavardage ou Q&A. You can ask questions in the chat or Q&A for myself or Xavier. I'm going to go over the questions that we've received so far. So thank you so much for your participation and for your questions. Okay, so a good question that I saw here is if we were not prompted to reapply and simply got a generic message or letter about competitiveness, is it worth it to reapply? And I would say it's hard for me to tell you yes or no. I think what you have to do is you have to, think back to what I was saying about general competitiveness. So, if you look at your file and you think from an academic point of view, you sort of fall within the averages and you kind of are there from an academic competitiveness standpoint, what are the other elements of your file that you might be able to improve upon in order to improve your file overall? So if you think that those are things that you can work on, then by all means, and if you're really committed to going to law school, then by all means, you can definitely try again. Again, I say this, and I know that for some folks, the thought of reapplying and paying the application fee, again, is maybe not possible or daunting, and I totally respect that. But, as Xavier mentioned, he applied to other schools as well, and that took some of the stress off. So maybe that's something that you think about doing if you do submit a subsequent application. Another good question, if we apply without the LSAT, does it diminish our likelihood of getting in? So no, but so 40% of our incoming class, other than the Stage-Up students, have written the LSAT. So that means 60% of the applicants who are applying in the university or mature category do not have an LSAT on their file. And so it certainly, it doesn't mean that you won't get in, or it doesn't mean that you'll have fewer chances. But what an LSAT does for us, and I mentioned this a bit before, is that sometimes it can help compensate for a weaker academic profile in terms of your transcripts. So maybe if you haven't done as well, in your undergrad or your grad studies, and you might have a situation that you went through and you can explain it, but you also want to just give us a little bit more to show that you have academic strength, an LSAT is a good option. I say that knowing that the LSAT exam is quite challenging, it's quite expensive, time consuming, and there are certain populations of students that just traditionally don't do as well on the LSAT. So for example, some visible minorities and some folks from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So the LSAT gives us some information, but it doesn't give us all the information. So again, it's really up to you to decide whether it's something that you want to embark upon. And I hear this next person, they wrote, the letter doesn't really say why we were refused. So it's really hard to work on improving when we don't know why we were refused. It does, it's frustrating, I know, but it does require you to do a little bit of soul searching, self-reflection, maybe speak to some friends, maybe, if you know folks who are in law school or in the legal profession, having them look it over and try and get their perspective. But if you try and focus in on the things that I talked about this evening in terms of improving the various elements of your file, that's a good place to start in terms of being able to work on things. A question about, whoops, I've just moved to the next slide. This is actually good because it has links to our website, our email address, as well as a link for you to get in touch with us to book an appointment for advising. A question about how to prove, well, how do we prove our French proficiency? And maybe this person also wants to know how to improve and prove that they have improved their French proficiency. But our website has more information on this fact. So for this cycle, as we have in the past, you can demonstrate your French proficiency in various ways. So it can be through courses that you've taken, either in university or Cégep, or through a private organization like Alliance Française, for example. And so you would be prompted, if you wanted, to upload that information, keeping in mind that if your French courses are on a transcript that you would otherwise be uploading into the applicant portal, so for example, your university or your Cégep grades, you don't need to resubmit those. So we have that evidence. But if you had a certificate of French proficiency through an external organization, you can upload that. We're also going to be looking at your CV to see if you've partaken in any activities, whether they be work or volunteer activities where you've had to use French. We're also going to be asking your referees, to the extent that they're able to comment on your French proficiency. And so all together, we're going to be looking at that to determine whether or not you have the level that we require. If there's any question, you may be called and prompted to pass a telephone test. So it's a comprehension test where we would ask you questions in French. You could answer in English or French, but it's really just to determine whether or not you have the level that is required for the faculty. A question about what is considered a good LSAT. So I mentioned earlier the stats, and so average last year's incoming class was a 164, if I'm not mistaken, and upwards of, I think, 86% of our incoming class had an LSAT of 160 or higher. So it's quite high, and so that is sort of what you're up against. And so I would let you decide what you think is good relative to those stats. Again, a question about the LSAT, what kind of score would be competitive? As I just mentioned, and I'm going to go back to the slides because I don't want to get the stats wrong here. Excuse me for flying through here quickly. Yes. So that's it. 86% of the incoming class last year had an LSAT score of 160 or higher. And I encourage you to take a look at our website under the eligibility tab. There is a sort of a table that breaks down the different scores and sort of the proportion of folks with different score bands, just to give you a sense of where most of our incoming students are with regard to the LSAT. And I'm going to go back now to, whoops. I'm going to go back now to this slide. Ooh, a good question. I applied several years ago and cannot seem to access my refusal letter. Is there a way to receive another copy from the faculty? My sense, I believe everything is saved in your Minerva profile. So if you have your student ID number, you should be able to log into Minerva and access your letter that way. I don't know if there's an expiration on letters, but what I would suggest is you reach out to our admissions team just to see if they can help answer that question. I'm not sure if Kelly's around and if she can answer, and if she knows whether or not there's a time limit on how long things are stored in Minerva for applicants.
I'm here.
Yes, Kelly. Yeah. Do you know the answer to this question?
Normally it's 5 years.
Okay.
So depending on how far back it was,
yeah.
but normally it's about 5 years that you can go back.
Okay, and that's it. So 5 years from the Minerva point of view, and our office only keeps files for 3, so we don't have any, we don't have anything more recent or longer than Minerva does. So thanks, Kelly.
You're welcome.
A question about when reading the new personal statement, does the committee also refer to statements from previous years? I talked about this a little bit. So, so it's really the assistant dean that sort of does a more in-depth look at the previous applications, and certainly I will take a look, because I want to make sure that there has been improvement, or not improvement, but some change, right, to the personal statement that you submitted from a previous year, so that you've taken the time to rework it in some form. But again, we only have access to files from the previous 3 years, so depending on how long ago you would have applied, we might not have it. How do graduate grades factor into the assessment of a candidate? So as I mentioned, we look at the undergraduate grades as the sort of comparison point between you and other applicants, but graduate school grades can be helpful to us because they can demonstrate that, you know, you've done particularly well. I know that when I applied, I had much stronger grades in my master's than my undergrad, and I do think that that helped me. So it's not it's not because we don't have graduate grades for everyone, whereas we do have undergraduate grades for all of the folks in the undergraduate pool. So it's not the point that we're going to be using to compare you to other folks in that pool, but it's certainly helpful because it can, again, demonstrate your academic abilities. Okay, and what component of the application should potential weaknesses be addressed? And I think the answer to this question depends on sort of the type of weakness that you believe you might be say suffering from, but you might have in your file. So if it's an academic weakness, then clearly it would be through grades, classes, and LSAT. But otherwise, you know, really make sure your references, you're getting the best references. We're looking for quality of the references, not necessarily how impressive they are. So make sure that your referees are, submitting positive letters on your behalf. If it's, maybe a lack of involvement, trying to focus in on being involved in different organizations, causes, getting work experience, but again, in an area that's of interest to you and that you're passionate about. And then your personal statement, obviously trying to focus in and making sure that it's the most polished as it can be, that you've done the work, that you've made that clear connection between the different elements of your file, that you've gone through and you've answered those 3 questions, or make sure that they have been answered in some way or another. Xavier also made a really good point about not necessarily feeling like you have to fill the space. Obviously, if you write something that's way too short, we're going to be thinking, okay, what this person doesn't have a lot to say. But one of the first things that you learn in law school is that it's really important to be as compelling as as compelling as possible, without necessarily writing these long run-on sentences. And actually in bar school at École du Barreau, the shorter your answer, the more chances you were of getting the right answer. So putting too much stuff down can sometimes get you in trouble. But really focusing on producing something that is free from errors, that answers those questions, and that really ties the various elements of the application together. Okay, thanks, Kelly. I saw you popped in a link in the chat. A question: high school bilingual education count? I would say no. I mean, it counts in the sense that it's giving you a foundation to French, but generally high school has been a number of years, or if not more, from the time that you are applying to law school. And unless you've continued to keep up your French, that's probably not going to be enough. If you're wondering about whether or not you have the required level of French, I would take a look at our website under the eligibility tab. There's a language requirements where you're going to see an excerpt of a Supreme Court judgment in French. And so that's a very good example of the type of text that you're going to be seeing when you're a law student. But the committee is going to be looking for more recent evidence than high school. So I hope that answers the question. So good question here. Can applicants transfer from any common law school, or it must be a Canadian law school? Yes, it has to be a Canadian law school. We do not accept transfer applicants from schools outside of Canada. So it really has to be Canadian. When reapplying, are we to make a new Minerva account or use the same one if we've applied a few years ago and did not enroll in courses? You are no longer applying through Minerva at all. Hooray, you're applying through the applicant portal. So there's a link on our website that says apply here, and it's going to take you to a whole new portal. The ID number that you were given when you applied the previous time will be reused because the system is smart and it's going to figure out who you are and that you already have that you already exist in our system. But it's no longer through Minerva. It's really through the applicant portal. Okay, good question. When submitting an extenuating circumstances document for a specific semester, how much do the grades for that semester weigh in or count? So it's really going to depend on the type of circumstance you're disclosing, and it really is at the discretion of the admissions office. But what specifying a specific class or semester helps us do is in the situation that it's very clear that you were going through a really tough time for whatever reason, we can exclude those grades from your CGPA calculation and readjust by removing those. So obviously, if it's over the course of your entire university degree, that's another thing. But if it's over a particular time, we can make that adjustment. Okay. A question here about someone who maybe had started law school. We see this quite often, students who start law school and who have to withdraw, or maybe haven't performed as well in some classes, and this happens quite often for transfer applicants as well. How is the committee going to be looking at those grades? For sure, they're going to be really, really important because, as I mentioned, performance in law classes specifically is very relevant, right, to our law faculty and the classes that you're going to be taking with us. So I would say that if you've started law school in some capacity and you've had to leave it for whatever reason, please consider submitting an extenuating circumstances document to explain what was going on during that time, because otherwise there will be kind of questions that are left unanswered. Okay, a question about someone had, in terms of course loads, and maybe it wasn't sort of a full-time course load. There are various reasons why folks might not have a full-time course load, whether it's part-time work, whether it's a personal situation, that sort of thing. If it's a situation that sort of fits the definition of what we call extenuating circumstances, and these are explained in the application itself, then by all means you can submit a document or you can submit a form that explains that. Good question about the CV. If there are community engagements that are still ongoing, for example, volunteer work, do we have to state this, or is if there's no date, is it understood by the committee that it's still ongoing? Normally, what I see in a lot of cases is that the person will put the start date and then dash and then current or ongoing, just to clarify, because someone might think it was for a specific period of time. For example, if you just put 2021, they might not know that it's still happening. And then the last question, because I see that it's already 6 p.m. This session went really quickly. Is it okay if the CV doesn't change much? What factors need to be changed? For sure. So again, it depends. It depends on how much time has passed since your previous application. If it's been 2 or 3 years, the committee might wonder, well, what's been going on the last couple of years? What have they been up to? Again, it's about trying to fill the gaps and anticipate the kinds of questions the committee is going to have about your candidacy. And so, it's always helpful for us to see that something has happened in the interim between your first and your subsequent applications. So, you know, if you've just maintained involvement in the activities that you were already involved, then that's fantastic. So you don't necessarily need to add new things, but just show that there's been sustained commitment. And if you added new things, that's great too. So I think I'm going to leave it there for now. I don't want to take up any more time, but I really encourage you to get in touch with us. Envoyez-nous un courriel. Vous pouvez aussi fixer un rendez-vous avec un membre de notre équipe. On va avoir plusieurs événements de recrutement au travers le mois d'octobre et aussi en novembre. Donc, restez à l'affût sur notre site, notre page web sur les événements de recrutement. I really, really, again, commend you for participating this evening. I know it's not easy to kind of talk about these things and think about refusals and reapplying. And for those of you who end up reapplying, I wish you the best of luck in the application process and all the success in your future endeavors, whether that be at McGill or somewhere else, whether that be in law or something else. And I hope that this was useful, and I wish you all an excellent evening. So thank you so much. And